So hi there, this is a video about some questions I got from a student from the Rijksuniversiteit Groningen. Last month I did an excursion there with some students from the Multilingualism and Minorities master's degree, I think I say that correctly. And afterwards the students were allowed to ask questions on the excursion we did to the hijacking site of the Punt. The Punt was the site of a Moluccan hijacking in 1977. If you want to hear more about that story in its entirety, use Google, Wikipedia or other sources to learn more about that. But anyway, we had an excursion to the place where the train was hijacked and then assaulted by Marines. Shot up really badly, 6 hijackers and 2 passengers died. And the students of the Rijksuniversiteit Groningen were allowed by their teacher to organize more work on that topic. And one of these students, Eleanor, decided to do this and wanted to ask me some questions. Well, we were going to have a Skype conversation in which we would discuss the topic and which video she could then use for the project and for the project blog. But due to all kinds of technical problems that didn't work out. So she asked me to answer the questions on paper, not on paper, written, typing on email. But I thought, well, let's make a video anyway, so I can also explain to other people who might be interested how I approach this topic of the Moluccan hijackings. Again, if you want to know more about the origin of the hijackings, which has to do with colonialism and decolonization of the Indonesian Dutch colony, do some research elsewhere, because I'm not going to address that entire story in this video. So Eleanor asked me 5 questions with some sub-questions, which we'll now try to answer in under 10 minutes. So to keep this video a bit short, we'll probably fail because once I get started, I can keep on talking. So, first question is, please could you explain your background in the field of archaeology and how this has led you to the Moluccan case? Well, from education, I am not an archaeologist. I am actually an evolutionary biologist, so that's a completely different field. That's we would call that beta science in Holland, or natural sciences in English, which means that I was doing actually DNA work. But I found my way into archaeology somehow through a volunteer project, which evolved into a small job in Second World War archaeology, which was very much still new in 2008 when I started doing this. And because it was very new in Dutch archaeology, there was also not very many people doing it, and when people were needed, they would actually go to people who were doing it as hobbyists. To help out. So I started out as an amateur actually, but I evolved through Raap Archeologisch Adviesbureau and became an advisor a consultant, I should say in English. I consulted in Second World War archaeology. I did lots of excavations, field work, desktop work, all kinds of stuff. So how did this lead me to the Moluccan case study, Moluccan hijacking case study? Well, the thing is that when we were working on World War II battlefields, like for example close to my house on the Grebbeberg, which is one of the most important battlefields of the Netherlands of 1940, I started to think, if contemporary archaeology, which this is contemporary archaeology, which is a very, very new field in archaeology in the Netherlands, if contemporary archaeology is getting more and more part of the Dutch curriculum, then why not even go further on that path and look at even more recent conflict? And the Moluccan issue, as we call it in Holland, is one of these conflicts which is more recent than the Second World War and which has produced what we can call now sort of battlefields, because we had 2 train hijackings, a school hijacking, and several other hijackings, which in most cases involved some kind of violence, which was also in which also military equipment was used. So you could say in a way that these were battlefields from a battlefield archaeology perspective. So this was a very traditional starting point at the time, because I'm using the word battlefield archaeology, which is a traditional kind of archaeology which is different from contemporary archaeology, but that's going really too far to explain that whole difference. But in any way, I was thinking, if we do Second World War, why not do Cold War? Why not do decolonization war in the Netherlands with the Moluccans. And this was actually the primary idea which led me to do the archaeology of the Moluccan hijackings of 1975 and 1977. So then the second question Eleanor is asking is, what did you look at when you approached the site at the Punt? So the site at the Punt is actually the name of the village. The site at the Punt is the place where the train stopped when the Moluccans hijacked it, and where it stood for almost 3 weeks, I think, almost 3 weeks, yeah, and then was shot by Marines to liberate the hostages. So what did I look at? Well, as an archaeologist, I was trained to look at visible evidence from field observation. So I was looking for bullet holes, I was looking for materials next to the train tracks, I was looking for potential trenches or gun positions of the Marines, I was looking for maybe damages of explosions or whatever. Everything that's physical I tried to observe and record, I should say, in my database. Now, this was a very short event which lasted only 3 weeks. Most traces, of course, had been removed straight after the event itself. So it was really hard to find traces, but as I've told you during the excursion, there is this one pole which still has the bullet holes from the machine gun fire, and there is a manhole, a slit trench, where the police and Marines did their observation in the golf course, which is very close by. This is the main traces that we found. Of course, there's probably a lot of other traces too in the soil, but that's the thing with archaeology, you can't see it. You really have to do more investigation if you want to know if there is more objects, litter, bullets, cartridges, casings in the soil present. Suddenly my light gets brighter. I don't know why that is, but lighting went weird for a minute, but I've corrected that now. That's a lot better. So what did I look at? Well, mainly at physical evidence still present. And of course you can immediately ask the question, what is the heritage at this site? Is it the physical remains, or is it also the landscape, which does not show direct evidence of the events, but is still the same as in 1977. That's a very important, well, maybe we might say ontological question about heritage. Okay, so the third question is, how would you approach the site of Bovensmilde from an archaeological perspective? Well, of course, I have approached the site at Bovensmilde from an archaeological perspective. Bovensmilde is the site where, simultaneously with the hijacking location at the Punt, a school was hijacked with quite a lot of children. And it was liberated by Marines in the same way as not in the same way as the train, but it was in a violent manner, in the sense that armored cars ran into the school and dropped hand grenades and freed the teachers, which were still kept prisoners there by the Moluccan hijackers. The children had already been released, so there was no danger for the children. And I've also approached that site from an archaeological perspective, and well, I approached this actually on the same day and in the same way that I approached the site at the Punt, which meant that I went there and I looked for physical traces. Now, the important thing with the school in Bovensmilde is that it does not exist anymore. The school was very much damaged. It might have been repairable, I'm not sure, but people were so shocked in the small village that the school had been hijacked that they just decided that the school should not be reused again in the same place. So they moved the entire school, they built a new school somewhere else. So talking about archaeological evidence, the archaeological evidence for the event in this case is the absence of the school. In the Punt, the train was of course gone because the train was moved to a restoration garage, but the tracks and everything else stayed more or less the same. In Bovensmilde the situation is different because the school had been demolished afterwards as a result of the hijacking. And this changed the neighborhood forever. So I think it's really intriguing that the hijacking of course changed the mindset of the people, because Moluccans and other Bovismilde citizens were living more or less peacefully together. Some things worked out fine, other things did probably not work out fine. And then there is this hijacking which completely disrupts the relationship between those peoples even more. And then the school is demolished, which in my opinion became sort of a scar. The empty spot of the school became a scar in which, which refers to the pain which is still present in the village. Of course, only recently, and now I forgot the date because I'm talking to the camera, but I think 2014 or 2006, somehow don't pin me down on the dates right now. I will have to look this up. But a monument was erected at the site by the former school children from the school and some civilians from the village to commemorate what happened in at that location. And the sub-question here is, would I approach this site differently than the site of the Punt because of the circumstances? And it does not say very clear here, but I think I know what you're trying to say. The Punt is of course an empty field. There's nobody there. There's one farmer close by and there's the golf course. But if you're there on the spot, you won't meet anybody. It's empty. In Bovismilde, you're in the middle of the village. So if you're doing an archaeological registration of everything you see, then you will encounter the people. At that time, I did not make a difference, but I did feel really awkward when I was looking into the traces there, because I really felt like being a white Dutch archaeologist. So from a certain social group, I was sort of invading that area and, you know, poking around in old pain, which was not my pain, but I was sort of trying to record the traces of it. So with regard of a different approach to the site archaeologically, I think in essence there should not be a difference in approach, because the same sensitivities and hurt are also present in the Punt, but in effect you can get away with it in an archaeological way, as we are used to in archaeology to get away with things, because we never meet the people we are investigating, because most of the time those people are dead. So that's why we can in a similar way get away with it at the Punt. But in Bovismilde you can't get away with it, so you have to engage the people. At that time I did not talk to anybody. I felt really uneasy about this. I took some pictures. People passing by could clearly see that I was taking pictures. So I really felt like an invader, and I think at that time I was still approaching the whole thing too much from a traditional archaeological viewpoint, in which I am a detached, not involved, in fact not human analytic researcher who is doing an observation through its microscope to the thing he wants to study over there in the village of Bovismilde. And I think that's a problem in contemporary archaeology, because the victims and the perpetrators, if you want to call them like that, are still alive and present. So the next question, Eleanor asks what I would advise her to do when she approaches a site like the Bovismilde school. Well, the most important thing I think is to be open for contact. So with contact with people who live there. And you know, you're in the Netherlands, this is an open environment, you don't need permission to visit the site itself. But if people see you there and people ask questions, of course, you're going to tell them what you're doing and why you're doing it. And also, I think it would be a wise thing to prepare in advance, that you have sort of the lines ready in your mind or in your heart of the things you want to say when somebody approaches you like that. You never know what's going to happen if somebody approaches you. Actually, the first person that approached me was Geert, who you have met, who is one of the children from the school and is in that sense a victim, but was really coming forward to tell more about what happened back then. So that was a very surprising meeting we had there. Well, something like that can happen to you too. It might also be somebody who is related to the hijackers, or it might be Moluccan children or non-Moluccan children. just be open and give answers. If you want to do it the full way, I mean, if you want to do really profound research, then always include the people who live there in your research. So now, how to do this is a matter of strategy, which I've not done that myself in this way before, but in this case you already have the name of one of the eyewitnesses of the time, Geert, who you can approach and ask for advice in this. So then you have somebody who is already in the community and who can help you get further in the community. Of course, when you do this, he will give you a direction, and this direction will determine where you are going. So from a scientific perspective, it might not be that methodically objective, but that's what research in contemporary archaeology is. It is not objective, it is very subjective, because you have to deal with people, and well, you have to be very careful in your method, in recording what is factual and what is opinion, and also quantitative in that. But in essence, everything you do is influenced by people that you meet. So your research is not objective in the natural sciences way of speaking. It is subjective, whatever you do. Fourth question is, are oral archives and maps important in a case like this? It really depends on what you want to do. My goal is always that archaeology should benefit the biggest number of people at the location or in the environment. I think I should not do archaeology in Boven-Smilde if my goal is just to write my own scientific paper and get famous in archaeology. So are oral archives and maps important in a case like this? Yes, probably, if you want to do a recording of everything that happened, and if you want to include the opinion of people who have seen it or are living there right now. Yes, they are important. Well, your goal could also be, that's really very much the way I think of archaeology. Archaeology can also be, or heritage study can also be a way of promoting healing in the communities. If you try to do that, then your approach would be completely different than if you're trying to reconstruct events. And I can also tell you in advance that regarding battlefields, most battlefields of recent times, recording events is really hard, and archaeologists are not historians, and important events and the order of events, I think, is not something that conflict archaeology can address really well. So well, I lost myself a bit in trying to answer that last question, so I will include the next sub-question which you ask is, do you think it is important to look at the past when landscaping heritage in the present? Landscaping heritage. That's a difficult word. What do you mean with landscaping heritage? Or heritaging landscape? You could also say that. What is the heritage in a place like this? Is it the remains of the past, or is it the way that the remains of the past are perceived by the people who are living there? And if it is the latter one, then what effect will changing the landscape have on the people, and vice versa? If you change the people, how will that affect the landscape and how it is perceived? So both are connected. And you cannot change a landscape without looking at the past, because even if you completely ignore the past, then you're completely ignoring the past. So you're still doing something with it. You're destroying it or taking it away, and this will have an effect on the people. There is no way of doing landscape designing and not including the past. The only thing you can do from an historical archaeological perspective, I think, is to take into account as much as possible everything that is there and that is important. And the thing you know, of course, is that it's very important to make a distinction between what the professionals think is important and that which the locals think is important. You have to include both. If you just use the professional viewpoint, you will miss out on the people. If you just use the local viewpoint of the people who are living there, which are often also divided in many different groups, like Moluccans and non-Moluccans, and then within the Moluccans there is also a different group, and within the other people there's also a different group. So try to include as much perspective as you can to inform your landscape design. And this will always be messy. There is no clear-cut answer. There will be no clear-cut solution to the problem, but you do need this discussion about the landscape and the past to come to a new design. You have to be informed, and you have to explain your choices, the choices you make. And in a case like the Moluccan issue, the chances of making some people angry are, I'd say, 100%. There's always going to be a group of people who will absolutely be unhappy with what you do. But that's just what it is to live together after a big trauma. There will be people angry. You can only do your best, and the main advice I can give there is to use your heart. Never let abstract academic rules or ideas about what heritage is steer you in a certain direction. Always use your ears and to listen to the people, and use your heart to decide which is the right approach. And it will be messy. It just will be messy. Last question. When deciding whose heritage Bovensmilde School belongs to nowadays, what do you think is a reasonable response, considering the events that took place in the past? Well, the thing with heritage is, and I think for me that's the big difference with how archaeology used to be. Archaeology used to be scientific. So you would sort of think as archaeologists that heritage is, or that archaeology is neutral because it's scientific. Of course, this is not the case. Archaeology is very political. But the interesting thing is that for me, the big difference between this old view of archaeology and heritage is that heritage is always claimed. Heritage is always somebody's heritage, and therefore also definitely not other people's heritage. So the word heritage is connected very much to division, because if it's our heritage, it's not your heritage. If it's your heritage, it's not my heritage. And if it's our heritage, then we apparently belong to the same group. So whose heritage is it? Well, I think in Bovensmilde, I'm not going to answer the question whose heritage it is specifically, because I think the people should decide among themselves whose heritage it is. And I think that's part of the heritage process in this case, is that people try to figure this out. And like Geert told, the witness from the school, if you try to do this in a heritage project, you will get discussion, and you will get, in this case, emotional responses. And these emotional responses and how you respond to that in a heritage project, in a potential heritage project, that's the heritage. The pain, the grief that's in the village of Bovensmilde, that's the heritage. And that's the arena in which you have to work. I don't care if the monument stays there. I don't care if the monument is being cared by the Moluccans or the white people or the municipality or the state. As long as all these people still come together and discuss what has happened in 1977 and how they want to go forward in the future. And that's the important word here, because heritage should be about the future, and heritage always is about the future. You cannot recreate the past in any sensible way. So what is heritage? It's about the future. A reasonable response. Well, maybe that's the last thing that I want to say before I close this video. Yes, it's all about reason and heart. And I think contemporary archaeology and contemporary conflict archaeology in a complex site like this means that it's a mediation process, and as an archaeologist, you cannot tell people what to think or what to like or what to call their heritage. You can only try to offer a perspective, bring together perspectives of many people, and hopefully create some understanding in the process. And then they might decide together if the heritage is worth keeping, or they might decide to just get rid of it. And that option is still very rare in archaeology. We are very focused on preserving, and in some cases this is a very valid response, and in other cases we should say, well, now we've come to a point where we can close the pain in our heart, and we're going to do something completely different and change the world and the landscape. So I think that's all I have to say. I wish you good luck with your project, and I hope you send me the results. I'm really curious to see, read or hear about it. So thank you and good luck.